Okay, so we've spent some time with our scene, we've modelled it, we've put all the appropriate objects in, we've lit the scene, we've put materials onto it, we've placed our camera correctly. So now we need to get a picture out, and that process of getting a picture out is known as rendering. We've touched on it briefly in previous examples and previous tutorials, and really what I want to do now is just talk about the options that we need to go through in order to get a good render out, good picture out, really. So our render scenes dialog is up here, or our render setup dialog as it's now called. It was called render scene years ago. And you can see here that I've set myself up already to work with the mental array renderer. Okay, so in my common tab, under assign renderer, I picked my mental array renderer. And I then said, under indirect illumination, I'm going to enable final gather and set the preset to low. So that's one thing. That's our lighting setup. Okay. One or two other things that we spoke about as well was not necessarily under processing, but under renderer. I might well want to change my sampling quality, so I'll make sure that's set to Mitchell, and we've got a good production render quality setting in here. So that's good. For the size of image, I might turn the buckets down to 32 just to make sure that I get good contrast between the two. And then I'm really going to stop in here under the common parameters. Now this is one that we haven't spoken about yet, and one that we really should do. We've got our time output here, and this is really if you're working with an animation or with stills. Okay, so the single frame, wherever your time slider is, down at the bottom here, so whichever point, you can see the camera moving there, whichever point I decide to stop at, so say I like, oh yeah, I like that frame the best, yeah, I'll decide, right, maybe I'll come back, this is just auto saving here for a moment, maybe I like that one, that's great, that's the frame I want to have. So wherever I now press render, it's going to give me one single frame at this time period. Okay, that's what single frame is. Your active time segment is, this is 1000 frames long, this animation. So there you go, that's probably a better position. It will render the whole, every single frame in that animation. Yeah, where it saves it to we don't know, but it'll do everyone. If we just want a section of this animation to be a render, we can define that section as 0 to 850 or 200 to 850, anything like that. And if I want specific frames through the animation, so say I want certain points every 50 frames, I'll do 0, 50, 100, so on and so forth. So that'll work. Area to render. Now you see we've got here selection, region, crop, block. These are quite interesting ones. We'll talk about those in a little bit more detail in a moment, because we've got to do a render first of all, and then we'll come back and talk about them. But that's actually quite an interesting topic to talk about there. The next thing to pick is our output size. Now by default we are set at custom, and you've got options here such as 640 480, which is small screen resolution, and 800 600. 720 486, there's more of an NTSC standard, bless them. And we want to change that, so we'll either type in a value here, and I'll say 1024 and then 768. And that's the size at which I'm capturing this whole screen. So that'll be a 1-for-1 for the screen that you're seeing at the moment. More than likely, you will be working, if you're in the UK, you'll either be working with PAL D1 video, or more than likely nowadays you'll be working with Hdtv video. Okay, the rest of these are kind of film apertures that you're going to be, and really we wouldn't be using those particularly unless you're doing film. But you know, really most of the work I do now, I come down here to Hdtv, and again most of the work I'm going to be doing is probably going to be 1280 720. That's a good solid television HD size. Very rarely that you work at 1920 1080. To be honest with you, very rarely you'd be doing that. But yeah, it's most of the work I do now is 1280 720. If you want to, you can halve that for test rendering, 640, 360, that's quite acceptable. Okay, so that's really the set of sizes that you're going to be working at. I can pick a preset here, 490, 270. That'll help me render a little bit more quickly. You'll notice that the aspect ratio down here in your safe frames has changed as well. Okay, that's something that's worth looking at. Some of the options that you've got here, pretty much we want to keep these as is. I spoke in the preferences very early on about rendering to fields. We've got a checkbox there, render to fields. Bitmap proxies I don't want to really get into. Advanced lighting, yes, of course we want to use all of that, because otherwise what's the point? And then we come to the render file option. Now if I want to save this image, I'll click Save File, and then I'll click on Files, and I'll find a location for it. So we've got here video training, I don't want scenes, probably render output, and then outside .jpeg. The other thing as well I want to talk about here is the type of file that we want to save as. If you're saving a still image, you want to be saving in the TIFF file format, tagged image file format. If you're rendering for video, quite often you want to do a targa. More image types now, the high dynamic range ones that allow you to do post-processing with popular images, such as the Kodak Cineon, the OpenEXR, very, very popular one, that file format. And I think we've got an Radiance image HDR. That's rather old at the moment now, but it's still very, very useful. Do not render an animation as an AVI or a MOV file. If the computer crashes halfway through, you will lose everything if you do that, which is why we render as a set of sequential still images, and then we put them together in some kind of non-linear editing package like Premiere or something. PNGs I sometimes use because they're quite light. They're lighter than Targa files, and they have a transparency in them. Although recently I did a job for a client where I had to go back and redo a background because the PNG gave me banding on a gradient background. So you get gives and takes. It's not as heavy in the file size on the disk as a Targa file, but then you don't get the quality. So you pay your money, you take your choice really. I'm going to stay with the JPEG because I want a small file on site, on the screen. I'm going to render everything all in one go. I'm not going to worry about anything else. Boom, job done. So I'll press save. And there, the dialog's gone away, and it's found the location where it wants to save the file. Okay, so that's good. We don't need to worry about the other options about legacy file, image sequence. Don't worry about that. Rendered the framing window. You can save a little bit of memory if you're doing that. Really, if you're using a computer that's got more than 4 gig of RAM, you're not going to be saving that much on memory. Skip existing images. Now this is an important one. If you are rendering an animation in a set of stills and your animation bombed on a 500 or 1000 frame animation, it bombed at frame 500. What you can do is you can click this button, skip existing images, and press the render button again, and it'll skip through the first 500 and do the second 500. And you don't have to go up to this option and say range from 500 to 1000, so that's quite useful. Email notifications. A lot of people ignore these. Okay, if you're doing a render and you're going to be doing a network render, which is a little bit more intermediate, using a render farm, or even if you're just doing a large render over the weekend, it's quite nice to get an email when the job is done, or even if the job fails, it's still nice to get an email. What you can do is you can set this to actually send you an email when it's finished. It's brilliant. Stop worrying over the weekend. So maybe, you know, it's a Saturday night, you're thinking about do I not go out, you know, maybe I've got to go in tomorrow morning early, go into work, check and see if the render worked, so on and so forth. And then at 6 o'clock you get an email come through on your BlackBerry or whatever it is, and it just says render done, you know, such and such a time, took so long, saved it in such and such place. You thought, brilliant, I can go out and get my life back now. So you're not becoming a slave to this work. So very, very useful for the email notifications. I do suggest you pay attention to those. So really, before I start rendering, those are the things that I want to be looking at. There isn't much more in your presets that you want to be looking at the moment. You know, we've set all this up by hand, we've set the location, we've said don't do a video color check, which is this used to be on all the time, and if you click that button, you'll find that your renders will get altered. So if you're doing work for print, make sure that's switched off. Render hidden geometry is very, very useful. Just coming back up here to our options. That one, if you have hidden geometry in your scene, then, you know, because of constraints with your graphics card, yeah, that one will work. Don't make your area lights and shadows as points, for goodness sakes. You get these dodgy little things appearing in your scene. Force two-sided can be useful if you think you're getting uneven geometry that's been imported into your scene and not all of it's pointing in the same direction, you know, not all the faces. You can force two-sided and that can help. Super black, again, I'd keep away from that because you can cause yourself problems with the colour in your scene. It does, as it says, it makes the black super black. Yeah, I'd rather do that in post-production, really, honestly, to be fair. I don't want to be mucking about with this at render time, because what will happen is you'll create an image that you can't salvage later. Okay, and you know, we wouldn't have a post-production industry if it wasn't necessary, so you know, don't hobble yourself. So really, all that's left for me to do is to now press render, and you see we're transforming the vertices, up comes our image, and within a few moments we'll see that starting to render. There you go, we're doing the final gather points. When that's done, we'll be finished and we'll have a nice image that we can go and look up. So we'll do that. We'll look at that in a second. And there's our final result. So, okay, maybe I need to do a little bit more work on the lighting and on a few other things as well. But really, that's the process of getting your renders out. If you need to, we can sit here and we can make changes to our anti-aliasing without having to go back into these settings. We can change the precision of our glossy reflections and refractions. We can change a few things here about our final gather precision, various bits and pieces. To be honest with you, all of those are mirrored up here. And my personal view is, as much as it's great to change this, you're not going to change anything here in your render. So if I suddenly decide that, oh, actually I want to ramp everything up to be absolutely maximum, it's not suddenly going to change in that image in front of me. Yeah, I'm going to have to re-render. I'm not going to be able to just have it as it is. So to be honest with you, it's all very nice. Thank you very much, Mr. Autodesk, but I am going to close this window down and I'm going to come back here to my render setup window where I've got much better controls to change those options should I want to. Okay, so those are the options that I want to use for creating a render. In our next tutorial, we're going to start looking at something called the print size wizard, which is going to take away a lot of the pain for creating print images.